Welcome to another edition of Take a Ride with Me, the Paul Manafort Rabbit Hole Edition. Alright, today I want to talk to you guys about that almost forgotten name, Mr. Paul Manafort. He's the ex-campaign manager of the Trump campaign. Let's start from, almost the beginning. Paul Manafort used to work as a liaison between Ukraine and Russia, supposedly to keep the peace. He made tens of millions of dollars a year doing that. He became friends with a lot of different people on both sides of the fence. One of the people he became friends with is this guy named Oleg Deripaska. Oleg Deripaska is literally the right hand of Vladimir Putin. They're like best buddies, and he's either one of the main owners or the main players in Cyprus Bank, Alpha Bank, Deutsche Bank. They're all tied in together. They're all kind of rooted in the same thing. So keep that in mind for later on. Okay. Now, after leaving his position representing Ukraine, Paul Manafort went into real estate investments and stuff like that with another friend of his, Mr. Donald J. Trump. Paul Manafort was in the process of being sued for $18 million for real estate fraud shortly before becoming Trump's campaign manager. Now, the $18 million lawsuit was brought about by this real estate scam that was uncovered by the investor. And he was viciously pursued. This lawsuit went on for a long time, and it's public record. You can look it up. It's findable. The person whose money he stole and, defrauded this person out of was Oleg Deripaska. Now, this lawsuit pursuing Manafort was just vicious. It was vicious for a long time, for a very long time. And then magically, it just disappeared. Now, it disappeared 6 months before he became the unpaid, working for free, supposedly, campaign manager of Mr. Donald J. Trump. Now, Oleg Deripaska, being who he is, probably wouldn't walk away from $18 million, even though he's filthy rich and it's probably a drop in the bucket for him. All right, keeping that in mind, Manafort goes on working for Trump. Trump gets elected, whole 9 yards. The Russia thing, the Mueller report comes out. Mueller report comes out tracing phone calls to specific desks in specific companies, in specific buildings and addresses, in very, very detailed evidence, proven evidence, none of which was actually, admitted by anyone on Trump's team or Bill Barr or anyone like that. But anyway, it was very specific evidence that a majority of this stuff happened and was linked to these companies, these communications companies, these steel company, and all this other stuff. That was a big part of the Mueller investigation and the Mueller report. Mind you, at that same time, there's, billionaire oligarchs in Russia doing what they do. They're going out on yachts, playing with prostitutes, whatever they want to do. When all this is going on, there was this escort from Russia that videotaped a whole bunch of her little escapades. Not the dirty stuff, well, I'm sure some of that too, but mainly, being on yachts with these big, powerful people, recording phone calls, things like that. This one particular escort was on a yacht with Mr. Oleg Deripaska and a couple of his friends. Kept jumping on the phone with Don Jr., Paul Manafort, various people in the Trump campaign, just randomly recorded. Didn't mean much when it was, because to this Russian woman, who the hell are these people? Needless to say, this Russia investigation goes. Paul Manafort's convicted, put in jail, and pardoned and released. And all these different little elements come out, but don't really make much sense. Now, when the Mueller report was released, President Obama at the time sanctioned these specific companies that were found to be directly related to the Russian investigation. And the owner of these companies owned the biggest steel manufacturer and a couple oil companies and very important banks in Russia. But the steel was the reason that it actually made a big deal, because they actually supplied a huge amount of the steel to the country, and sanctioning that company in particular would cause a lot of economic distress, and President Obama didn't want to do that. But he did it. He sanctioned them. Needless to say, as the change of power goes in, Trump gets into the White House, Paul Manafort is pardoned, let out of jail. This random oligarch from Russia was pardoned, and his company was pardoned, and the sanctions were lifted. At the same time, the Russian embassy that was in the U.S. that had been cleared out by Obama, that was forgiven as well. The owner of this company, these companies directly involved in the Mueller report, proven evidence, the whole 9 yards, is Mr. Oleg Deripaska. So, we've got a pardoned oligarch best friends with Vladdy, a pardoned ex-consultant between Ukraine and Russia, supposedly keeping the peace. We've got a server that was found in the White House 24 hours a day, was connected to this entity called Alpha Bank in Russia, also owned or partially owned by Mr. Oleg Deripaska. The other part of the ownership went back directly to Vladimir Putin. So all of these people that were directly involved have been relieved of their punishment. So when we have a president that wasn't given any money by American banks, who wanted to start a bunch of golf courses during the real estate collapse and the real estate bubble, and all the money coming directly from Deutsche Bank, primarily, Alpha Bank, Cyprus Bank, all tied into Oleg Deripaska and Vladimir Putin. These same people getting sanctioned for meddling in the 2016 election, and then everyone's forgiven. We have all of this proven, and yet there's still a great section of the population that thinks it's all false, even though it's all documented. Now, Mr. Paul Manafort himself was involved with Ukraine, and his primary job description was keeping the peace between Ukraine and Russia. Now, if you remember correctly, in the process of all this, Mr. Trump wanted dirt on Joe Biden and threatened Zelensky and pulled military aid from Ukraine if they didn't get the dirt. And now Russia is in a war trying to take over Ukraine. I'm sure it's all coincidence. Just saying.